Hi, this is David Berkowitz, the Chief Investment Officer and founder of Value Line Partners, a Red Bank, New Jersey investment advisory firm. In this video, I'm going to talk about being an owner and not a loaner. Stocks are the only answer for a long-term investment plan. In my last video, I showed you there are only three assets to choose from: fixed income, no income, and rising income. We eliminated no income right off the bat because there is no way to value things like gold or stamps or art. Their value is simply what somebody else will pay for them at any given time. So there are really only two kinds of investments. One, there's fixed income investments like bonds, deposits, cash, those that pay a contractual amount of interest over a specified time. And two, shares of businesses with rising income and dividends, or what we all call stocks. No matter what your age, stocks are the only answer. I am now going to further make my case for stocks as the only rational choice for people that don't want to outlive their money. Stocks dominate bonds, cash, and commodities. Even if you've never owned a share of stock or owned a business, there's still a good chance that you have a personal experience with how wealth goes to the owners and not to the loaners. Consider buying a home and taking out a mortgage to do that. My father-in-law bought a house in Middletown, New Jersey in 1963. He paid $20,000 for it, which at the time seemed like all the money in the world. His down payment was $4,000, and he borrowed another $16,000 from the bank. 30 years later, he sold the home for $300,000 and retired to Sarasota, Florida. Yes, he did some improvements over the years, so let's say for an apples-to-apples comparison, the $20,000 house became a $250,000 house after the cost of improvements in a little over 30 years. What did the lender get when my father-in-law sold? He paid off his mortgage, so the lender got its $20,000 back plus a rate of interest, and my father-in-law got all the price appreciation in the home. The bank got all of its loan back with a 6% or $1,200 per year income. My father-in-law, though, got all the appreciation, all the profits. If this seems logical to you, then you already know the difference between being an owner and a loaner. Even if you came to this video saying that you don't even know the difference between a stock and a bond, we just demonstrated that you do. What are stocks? Simply, they are ownership shares of businesses. That's it. What are bonds? They are loans to businesses called corporate bonds, or loans to governments called government bonds, or loans to banks called deposits or CDs. Let's see how these two interact. To start or expand his business, an owner might very well take out a loan. The loaner gets a certain amount of security for his loan in the form of collateral, like the bank does when you get a loan against your house in a mortgage. But no matter how profitable the business may become, the loaner, meaning the bank or the corporate bond owner, doesn't participate in the profits. On the other hand, if the business is unprofitable for a long enough period of time and the owner can't repay the loaner will foreclose on the collateral. The inventory, the factory, the machines, or the intellectual property will be seized. The loaner to a business takes only the risk that the collateral may not be enough to repay the loan. If the loaner, or say the bank, does its job correctly, it does not take much of a risk at all. Loaners take not much of a risk for not much of a return, and zero chance of a home run if the business really takes off. The owner of a business, of course, takes on much more risk than the loaner. If the owner can't repay the loaner, like we said, the loaner will seize the major assets of the business, if not the whole business. If the owner succeeds, though, he gets to keep all the profits and all of the increase in value in the growing business above and beyond the face amount of the loan and interest paid to the loaner. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's really that simple. Think about it for a minute. Almost everyone you know that has achieved lasting financial independence owned a business or was a manager or share owner in a business. In our free enterprise economy, that's the way it's supposed to work. Look at the Forbes 400 of the 400 richest Americans. The top 15 all derive their fortunes from owning great businesses. You say that doesn't describe you? Yes, but tomorrow or any workday, you could always purchase shares of great businesses like these on the stock exchange, and you too will earn some proportional share of the wealth created there. Okay, we know that loaners take only the risk that their collateral will not be enough to pay off the loan. And that's not much risk at all, so loaners appropriately receive not much return at all. And owners seem to take on more risk, so their returns are high and sometimes really, really high, but certainly higher than loaners. Just how much more do loaners get? Let's look at the absolute returns of three assets: stocks, government bonds, and government bills, treasury bills, for the period 1928 through 2014. Now, this strikes me as fairly dramatic. It shows that over a long period of time that saw depression, inflation, recessions, world war, assassinations, stock market crashes, economic boons, the owner of stocks got 2 times what the loaner got. But wait, these are nominal returns, which means it's before we take out inflation. So what about inflation? These returns are less inflation. And what about taxes too? I guess you can say that after inflation and taxes, the owner got paid 5 times the loaner, but it misses the real point, that after inflation and taxes, bonds have had almost no return. Stocks are the only financial asset that has any significant positive return. Real wealth went to the patient, disciplined, long-term owner. Am I promising that stocks will continue earning 10% and bonds 5%? Nope. I have no idea what they will return over the next 30 to 50 years, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is the huge gap between stocks over bonds, owners over loaners. To the extent that logic and long history tells us the share owner will earn 2 times, 3 times, 5 times the bondholder's return, we know that stocks dominate bonds. But wait, you say, stocks are too risky. I say, whatever gave you that idea? What do you mean by risk anyway? The short-term ups and downs in stocks prices breathlessly reported minute by minute in the news media? Warren Buffett said in his 1993 shareholder letter that he defines risk using the dictionary terms as the possibility of loss or injury. Owners of businesses define risk the same way, and as owners of shares of those businesses, we do too. Professors and the big institutions who think they need precise mathematical measures of risk, probably to cover themselves from lawsuits, define risk much differently. For them, risk is the relative volatility of a stock or portfolio of stocks. See, volatility is measurable, but uncertainty is not, and that's unsettling to lots of people. But the false precision in the measurement of past relative volatility obscures what real risk is, which is the possibility of losing money. That definition of risk is not some theory that requires high-powered computers to calculate beta, alpha, and standard deviation, sigma. It's a common sense way of measuring risk by avoiding losses. Like you, most advisors, brokers, and professional investors for that matter think the stock market is risky, meaning volatile. And as a consequence of this false belief, most put too little of their money in stocks because they cannot bear the pain of watching the value of their stocks go up and down in the short term. This is a problem, a really big problem. Take a look at the stamps. The 3-cent stamp on the left was issued 65 years ago. The one on the right was issued last year at 49 cents. That means that the cost of a stamp has increased by more than 4% per year for the 65 years of the 2015 retiree's life. Let's look at this increase in the postage stamp price as a proxy for inflation over the years. At 4% inflation for 30 years, consumer prices will rise greater than 3 times during an average retirement at 3% inflation. It will be about 2.5 times. You will need about $2.50 to $3 of income in order to buy what $1 purchases right now. Or put it another way, $1 will be worth about 30 cents. If a generation ago your father retired at 65, he died on average at 73. But say you are 65 years old now, and assume your spouse is also 65. One of you will live until about 95 years of age. If you don't smoke, that's what modern actuarial tables tell us is going to happen to the average couple. And if you're 55 or 45 or 35 now, the plot thickens even further, doesn't it? The cost of living has never, in the 65 years of a typical retiree's life, stopped going up. The only reasonable assumption that we can make is that the cost of living will never stop going up. So if you need $100,000 per year of income in retirement to live the life you deserve, in the 10th year of retirement, you will need another $35,000. In the 20th year, you will need an extra $80,000 per year. You're not working. Where is the extra income going to come from? From your shares of great businesses. That's where. I'll leave you with this. I was born in October 1964. The stock market, represented here by the S&P 500 index, was at $84 then. It closed last year at $2,058. With dividends reinvested into the index, that would be an 11,196% total return, or about 9.7% per year. So always remember this: bear markets are temporary interruptions of a permanent uptrend, and stocks dominate bonds. Owners grow wealth and loaners don't. And the only way that you're going to keep up with inflation over the long term, including in retirement, is to own stocks of great companies. Thanks. I'll see you next time.